Welcome to NetDev Heroes. This is a podcast inspired by the NetDev and the NetBox communities where we're featuring and learning from inspiring networking pros in our community. I'm Kris Beavers. I'm the CEO of NetBox Labs, and I'm your host today. We really love the ecosystem around NetBox and other open source network automation projects. And our goal with this podcast is to learn about the people in our community, how they've developed in their careers as networking pros, what their networks are like, some of the problems they're tackling, how NetBox and other tech fits into their stack. I'm really thrilled to have as my guest today, Kaon Thana. Kaon has been in networking for most of your professional career, I think, right, Kaon? And right now he's a staff network engineer at the New York Times, where he is driving forward network automation across a pretty large and complex network. And Kaon's been contributing a lot in the community too. Just this week that we're talking, he published a new guide on connecting Slack and NetBox for interacting with IPAM data and chat. Maybe we'll come back to that a little later. So first, welcome, Kaon. Thank you for being on the show with me today.
Hi, Chris. It's great to be here. I'm excited.
Wonderful. Well, why don't we just start with something straightforward? Why don't you tell us all a little about yourself?
Sure. My name's Kaon, and I'm a network engineer. I started as far as network engineering early in my career. When I was a college student, I was working a part-time job for a wireless internet service provider in Manhattan. And in between my classes, I would go to people's apartments and fix their Wi-Fi or their printers. So you get real world experience real quick doing that, right? Especially, not angry. I shouldn't say angry, but everybody's usually pretty nice. But it's a quick way to get into the hornet's nest of well, I didn't even know it at the time as networking, but it's kind of just like fixing basic IT problems. But
Hmm.
as I did that, more and more, I kind of got curious about like what's happening like in the telephone closets. I would go and open and switch, open a door and see the switches. I would go up on the roof because we would have microwave links that we would install on rooftops. I would help the installers do that. Um, and then I was just doing this part time, and then I graduated, and they gave me a full time job, and I just kind of became a network engineer. But just by doing that, I kind of just fell into it.
Fell into it, yeah. And yeah, I think you fell into it because you were curious, it sounds like, and
Mhm.
it appealed to you. Like, how how did things develop from there? I mean, staff network engineer at the New York Times is a pretty cool senior title. There's been a path, obviously. What's that path been like? Tell us a little about it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So at this first job that I mentioned, the company was called Natural Wireless. We're a wireless ISP. So just started working on the network, and we were a small shop, right? So our goal was to just expand, and in these type of environments, you have to build fast and just build up new sites to stay above water, right? So you just have to keep expanding. So that included just provisioning, just like simple access points. So let's say if a new building was being provisioned, that means 500 access points need to be provisioned. So I would just either do that manually or use some scripting to do that. Um, and and just honing these skills of just constantly being kind of put through that fire almost of this a small shop, small environment, constantly expanding. It just forces you to learn. So that was kind of the first good chunk of my career, the first, let's say, 7 years. And then I kind of moved on to a more of a DevOps role as the network guy. So in this DevOps environment was a webcasting company called Global Meet, and we did live webcasts. We hosted them for like big banks, Fortune 500 companies, basically and any company you could think of nowadays is doing webcasts, right? So we were hosting those webcasts, and obviously the network had to be up, but the network was pretty stable in general. It didn't have like an insatiable need to grow, right? So in those 4 years there, I was able to kind of hone my skills in other ways, like sysadmin work or network security, or even getting into some AWS and CDN streaming. So again, just a curiosity thing, just kind of if I didn't have something specifically to do on a network that day, well, maybe I'll research what are we doing here? That's pretty cool, this kind of thing. And then from there, I wouldn't be a person working in Manhattan and downtown if I didn't get into finance. So I got into the financial district a little bit. Worked for a couple of years at a company called Invesco. Well, it was actually a company called Oppenheimer Funds as a lead network engineer. They were merged by Invesco, and they decided, they didn't really need us as network engineers anymore, since they had their own. no hard feelings. I gladly took the severance, put a dent in my mortgage, and then a couple of weeks later, interviewed, and a couple of weeks later, started at the New York Times, and I've been here ever since. Now in my fourth year, and I'm very happy to be here. And it's a great environment.
No, that's wonderful. And, kind of a natural progression. I'm really interested, especially to hear about, your experience in the webcasting company where, you got to sort of expand, call it your horizons a little bit, right? By exploring DevOps and sysadmin and cloud and other kind of related areas. And is that where you would say you started to pick up some of the skill set that's led you down the path of network automation, or how did network automation come into the picture for you?
Uh, you're very close. Actually, that's the first place I discovered NetBox, which is over 5 years ago now, maybe even longer. I mean, it depends how long NetBox has been around. I was probably one of the first times I discovered it on Reddit, through Reddit posts. I was actually trying to model data center racks, instead of an Excel spreadsheet that we had. Uh, but actually, even before that, since I was a computer science major, I knew something about programming.
Mm,
Uh, so, I mentioned at my first company, since there was so much rapid expansion, we had to do automation. I had to build tools. So PHP, curl, MySQL database was my go-to, stack, right?
mhm,
So just a lot of just scraping, web interface of access points or of microwave wireless links to check, let's say, their signal strength. So microwave wireless links are actually the best weathermen because when the weather is changing, when it's about to rain, because the signal starts dropping by a few points. So actually, I had some of these tools running in the background. We get emails like the signal drops every few points, like oh, storm's coming in downtown or in midtown. So I was writing these tools to kind of just to help myself, but they were more kind of like quote unquote artisanal, like ad hoc, scripts that, I wouldn't share these with anybody. Just kind of, I would run them out, make them work. That's kind of where I got into the network automation space. And then it just continued on as I
mm.
evolved through my career.
I think though, there's an important point in there. We are lucky to have a lot of people earlier in their careers in our community who are thinking about network automation, studying network automation, seeking to engage in network automation. And needn't be fancy, right? Like you can solve a lot of really hard problems with a bash script or some PHP, and that could be the starting point for something beyond that. Um, one more sort of career question I guess I would have for you. You've been at this now a while. You've seen a lot of stuff. You've evolved as a professional through a few different businesses and contexts and kinds of networks and problems. For those people who are earlier in their career in the NetBox community, what's a piece of advice you would have for somebody who, aspires to go down the network engineering path and grow over time?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably a couple things I could come up with. And if you're junior engineer, or even honestly any engineer. So first thing, lab, get hands-on, whether that's with real equipment or virtual, GNS3, Container Lab, EVE-NG, all the vendors have their own virtual stuff too out there. Just solve a problem in a lab, and, or make up a problem, right? Just anything, just do it. Uh, sure, read books, watch YouTube videos, that's fine, but pause the YouTube video, do the lab, right? Uh, Earmark the book, do the lab, then get back to it. If you just read through the book or watch the YouTube video, it'll go in one ear out the other.
Hmm.
Maybe there's some portion of people who it will stick to, and that's perfectly fine. It just wasn't me, right? So I would number one, recommend people get hands on and just do labs, and then I'd say maybe the other thing would be use Wireshark. So Wireshark will really get down to the protocol level and tell you what's happening, on the network level. So to most people, the network is kind of like a magic box.
Mm.
So, as network engineers, it shouldn't be a magic box to us. We should try to be the magician so we know where the rabbit is hiding. And really,
Hmm.
like kind of like Wireshark will tell you that exactly. It'll show you the TCP handshake. So you don't have to read it from a book, right? It'll just show you'll see the handshake, you'll see the packets and all the encapsulation from layer one all the way to layer seven. So if you do those two things, you could probably have a 25-year network engineering, no problem.
I think, one of the ways I would sort of distill down your advice there is like get tactile with the network, like get dirty, right? Don't stay academic, don't just read books, but get in there and mess around and tinker, right? And to your point earlier on sort of curiosity, on unleashing your own career from the earliest stages, that's what curiosity looks like, right? Is getting in there, tinkering, looking at the Wireshark data, and so on. It was great. Um, why don't we why don't we move over to talking a little bit about today? All right, so you're staff network engineer at the New York Times. Tell us a little about that network to the extent you can. Like what are
Yeah.
you dealing with?
We wear many hats, right? So as and most network engineers do, right? So it's kind of interesting. We have the classic enterprise, HQ, backup HQ, globally distributed remote sites, which we deal with. We have a production data center, which we deal with. And we also have something that maybe most people don't deal with, which is a paper printing infrastructure, right? So we have a huge facility that has to print the paper every night, no exceptions. That means the network has to be
Mm,
up. So there's that piece of it. We got our one foot in the classic kind of side network engineering, but at the same time, because we're a modern company, right? We have our other foot in more modern, multi-cloud, CI/CD, pipeline, automation, telemetry, uh,
mm,
observability. I can't say that twice. So,
mhm.
so you got those two distinct worlds that we kind of have to straddle. So it makes it really fun and interesting, and it just always wants you, keeps you up and coming back.
Mm, yeah, and what I hear there too is quite a bit of complexity, right? Because to your point, you're spanning, sort of real modern internet-facing infrastructure and almost industrial infrastructure, right? Of the printing infrastructure and also obviously HQ branch offices and data centers. So many and varied. What would you say are some of like the really big challenges that you find yourself and your team dealing with on a day-to-day basis in the network? What kind of problems or obstacles do you have to overcome?
Yeah, so our strategy is a vendor neutral strategy, which is good because we try to find the best firewall provider, the best campus switch provider, the best wireless APs, et cetera, right? What that means is you don't necessarily have to use the same vendor for everything because most likely the same vendor is not going to do a great job in all aspects of networking. So
Mm,
because of that, and there's a lot of positives to that, right? There's business continuity for that. There's maybe you have some cost parity or there's good positives to doing that. And you have the best systems that you can install. But the one potential challenge to that is kind of operational complexity, right? So what that means, obviously, so now if you have, let's say, five, six vendors, and in each of these vendors you have five or six different model types of their devices, and then they each have three or four different operating systems. Now you
mm,
have kind of exponential growth of complexity in operations, right? So if you solve a business problem one way for vendor X for product Y, and now you have to solve it many, many times. And that's why the way to combat this challenge is network automation, and not just network automation in the sense of like writing scripts, right? In the sense of
mm,
building a framework and tools on top of a strong foundation. That strong foundation being a structured database, which just so happens, I think a product that does
right.
that.
Might know one. Yeah. Uh,
So.
well, let's get to that in a minute, but
Yeah, yeah.
I think you just gave me a bit of a hint, but one of the things I'm sort of curious about is like how far do you feel like you are down the automation journey at the New York Times, right? It's obviously critical to your strategy. There's probably always more to be done, but like how pervasive is automation in your network?
Yeah, I mean, we have an automation first approach, mindset, so it is a brownfield environment, so there's legacy stuff. So we are still in the CLI, right? And like I mentioned, because of all the different vendors that we're using, it's not, all automation all the time, right? But we're trying. So we try to focus our energies, our resources that we have. So for example, let's say if a big chunk of our switches are on the campus are all the same vendor and the same type of switch, well, it's better to focus resources, maybe automating parts of that, But then when you do that now, maybe if you have, let's say, an out of band solution with a different vendor, well, you're probably not going to focus resources automating, those operations, right? So it's kind of a trade-off. So we're working on it, and we have a good percentage of automation, but there's always more to be
Yeah, it's always a journey, I think, and this
done.
is the common thing that we hear from almost everybody who's running a network, right? Like we're somewhere on the path,
Hmm.
and there's no end to the path, right? It's a consistent journey. Well, why don't we talk about NetBox a little bit? Obviously, important topic to me, and you
Hmm.
mentioned already, right? Like that NetBox serves a foundational purpose in your network. I think a first question I have for you here is. How did NetBox, come across, your radar? You mentioned it was well before the New York Times that you started to work with NetBox, and then how'd you decide to really start to use it?
Yeah, I had some familiarity with it. Didn't really use it for IPAM or automation much, just like I mentioned, the data center modeling stuff. But a project came along that we wanted to, we're using a monitoring system that kind of had a lot of tools bundled inside of it, IPAM, configuration backups, site contacts, and we wanted to move away from it. Um, and I took that up as an opportunity to kind of decouple our monitoring from our inventory because we were kind of using that as, we would take an export of that, and that would kind of be, what we knew would be of the network, right? The state of the network. Um, so I thought it would be good if you wanted to build a good automation framework, since we had some tools, Ansible tools and Python tooling already, uh, to kind of introduce NetBox and separate those two so that now we can populate NetBox with all the devices that we know of that should be, and obviously it's always improving. But now when we do choose a new monitoring system, which we ended up going with like a hybrid model, um, now we can sync. So now we know that okay, these are the devices, and if they're in here and if they're tagged properly, we know they should be monitored. And we can run like a daily script that checks, oh, if somebody accidentally added something in monitoring, but was never put in NetBox, let's flag the network team and let's fix that, right? Let's manually fix that. Or reverse, right? If somebody adds a new site, builds out a new site, it's got all these devices in NetBox. Oh, we forgot to add it to monitoring. Well, let's alert the network team and let's fix that. So that was kind of the first way we started. And then it kind of grew from there, and I can get into more projects from there if you want.
Yeah, I mean, and so just to play that back a tiny bit at you right away, it was about kind of separating the concern of like what is, I guess we'd call it the intended state of the network, and connecting that through automation to operational tools like in this case monitoring, right? To eliminate mistakes, eliminate manual toil, and obviously the start of a much broader journey. And so maybe to your point, like uh, uh, take us further down the road, especially in your network today. Like what part does NetBox play in your strategy today? What are some of the other jobs that it does?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it is our dynamic inventory for any of our Ansible playbooks, or as well as Python uh, scripting running or tools like that. So we use NetBox, and we make sure that the operating system is accurate, the connection. So for example, you have three different devices, right? Let's say you have a Cisco, Juniper, Aruba, Fortinet, right? Those are all four different or three different types of connection points that Ansible makes, right? There's network CLI, there's HTTP API, there's netconf. Um, so you need, so instead of accounting for that in every single playbook, well, if it's a field in NetBox, now when you pull down the inventory, now you know that's your connection point for this device. It doesn't matter what the device, at least you have that connection point. Same with any other variables you want to put in there from that respect, like maybe some sort of tag or something like that. So we use it as our dynamic inventory, and obviously when we make changes, that means when the script runs again, let's say in a day or in a week, you don't have to go and be like, oh, go to that script and tell it to run on these hosts because it's already in that box. It's tagged that it's going to run with, against these hosts, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then from there you can build up even more. So I have like a golden config engine, which I kind of leverage the NetBox config context with. So with the config context section in NetBox, you can create weighted parameters based on, let's say, on anything, but I base it on region. So for example, in Asia Pac, in Europe, or in North America, you're going to have different NTP servers, different DNS servers, different time zones unless you're using UTC. So you can have different variables. So using config context in NetBox, you can create a baseline config of all these variables you want to parameterize, and then you can make higher weighted ones for maybe site specific or host specific or region specific, so that now when we take this inventory and we funnel it through a Jinja 2 template, now we render a config that is dynamic based on your source of truth. And now you take this config that's rendered from Jinja 2, now you can use Ansible or really any product to now push it onto your network. Or instead of push, you can actually use this, which we're doing, for compliance checking. So if let's say somebody changes an NTP server by mistake or on purpose because we had to change it, well, if we didn't update the source of truth, then the compliance would be off, right? So we say, well, why is this different? So do we need to update the source of truth, or do we need to fix the device, right? So we could do it that way, or then we could run a flag that says, well, actually, instead of dry run mode, let's actually execute it and let's revert back to what we know our golden config should be. And I do have a post on that, so anybody can follow that along and do that as well. And then some other projects include, I think you mentioned, or at some point, the Slack integration. So one of the common use cases that I noticed that a lot of us were kind of doing on the network team is we would get requests into our Slack channel, and most of the time we would have to answer them because there's some knowledge that only we know, but there's a lot of it that I figured we could templatize, right? So
Mhm.
so since we have this info in NetBox, then yes, we can give read-only access to people, and we've done that. We've given plenty of teams read-only access to it. But some people don't want to open up another window or learn another interface, right? So everybody uses Slack every day. So I figured, all right, let's build a little Slack bot that has just a predefined list of options and a little form. So if you have a very specific IP question that you want all the info about, you could stick that in the form. And so you get your little product, you write your little slash command, you click, oh, what are all the VPN subnets? You click that, there they are, boom. I don't have to ask the network team for it, right? Or maybe you do, but at least you have a starting point, you know?
Mhm.
Same
Mhm.
thing with other type of services, like maybe if you want to know what the egress IPs for internet services, or anything you could think of, you could parameterize it as a tag in NetBox and then just show it to the user through Slack. And I built this and through an API gateway with Lambdas, and I get into that as well. But I think it's a good feature for stakeholders to use. That it just gives more visibility, more transparency to our network.
A common pattern that we hear actually a lot is that, look, the initial purpose or the driving purpose for um, uh, pulling all your network data together into a source of truth is to, kind of move down the automation pathway and unlock velocity and consistency in the network. But it turns out there's all these other constituencies who get a lot of value out of the fact that the data is there and it is correct, right? And now you're taking it an extra step and building some automations to make it accessible to those constituencies too, like you said, through Slack or other ways, which is really cool. Another question I have for you for a second. So let's talk about the open source community. You're out there often. You're writing these great blog posts about work that you're doing in and around NetBox and network automation in general. Why is it important that NetBox is open source?
Well, the community is great. I mean, I've had a bunch of issues that while posting the GitHub or in the NetDev Slack channel, and people are more than willing to help. I think I could think of one specific time I had an issue with the SSO plugin, and I think the author who wrote it, Jeremy Schulman, just responded in like 2 minutes on GitHub and helped me with my problem. So when you get people like that just being so helpful, it just makes you want to pay it forward and give back. That's one reason why I did tweeting about maybe some solutions I find or blogging about it or whatever. Because if somebody else is in my journey, like, 10 years prior to where I was 10 years ago, and they had that question, and, if I could help them, then that'd be great. And so that's kind of why I started that. And it's a great
Mm,
community.
yeah, of course I agree. Another quick question for you here is, I'd love to hear. I don't know, maybe your advice for the project maintainers, like where do you hope NetBox heads? What do you hope that people who are really actively contributing to NetBox are thinking about, or the community in general is leaning into?
No, look, I think they're doing a great job. I know there's a bunch of feature requests, I'm sure, in GitHub, and I'm sure there's more work than than they even have to do. So, anything that they want to prioritize, I think you guys have done a good job in kind of prioritizing that work, and it's been a good product. So I don't have any like very specific advice. I would just say just keep doing what you're doing, just improving. Every new release seems like it's adding something beneficial, and you know, just keep doing what you're doing, and it works great.
Mm. No, that's incredible. That's wonderful. Well, I feel like we're reaching kind of a natural spot here, Ken. So this has been a really wonderful conversation. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and there's great, advice and inspiration in here for people in the open source community, people early in their careers, people who are thinking about different use cases for NetBox, and also, I'll just plug briefly your blog where there's some great content, about some of the use cases and tools that you've built or ways that you've built tooling around NetBox or elsewhere for your network. So, just want to say thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. And with that, thanks to everybody too in our community for tuning in and as Ken said, for helping each other out and contributing in ultimately a million ways to the future of networking and network automation. With that, I think we're going to wrap, and I'll see you all next time.